The old town of Marinwood had always been a place where time moved at its own gentle pace. Cobblestone paths wound their way past bakeries that smelled of cinnamon, and the church bells chimed each morning like a lullaby waking the world. Yet for all its charm, Marinwood carried the same hidden burdens every place did, struggles tucked quietly behind closed doors, worries folded into the creases of people's daily routines. Among the townsfolk lived an elderly man named Elias Rowan. He had silver hair that curled around his ears, glasses that always slipped too far down his nose, and a smile that felt like a warm blanket on a winter day. Elias had lived in Marinwood all his life, working for decades as a carpenter before retiring to a life of gentle solitude. He wasn't wealthy by any measure, but he was rich in something most people forgot to value, a heart that held space for anyone who needed it. Every morning, Elias sat on the wooden bench outside his home with a small box of breadcrumbs, feeding the sparrows that flocked to him like old friends. Children loved him, adults trusted him, and even the stray cats seemed to know he was someone safe to nap beside. Still, no one truly understood how alone he often felt since his wife, Lila, had passed away years before. Their home, once filled with laughter, had grown quiet, too quiet. But Elias never allowed grief to harden him. Instead, he learned to pour his love into the world a little at a time. Not far from Elias lived a boy named Samir. He was 11, slight in build, with deep brown eyes that always seemed to be searching for something, understanding, comfort, maybe even hope. His father worked long hours in the city, and his mother took odd jobs to keep their small household afloat. Samir had learned early how to make himself small, how to not trouble anyone with his needs. Yet silence, no matter how bravely worn, still weighed heavily. Every day after school, Samir walked past Elias's home on his way back. Sometimes he slowed near the bench, watching the old man feeding the birds. Elias noticed him early on, offering a gentle wave each time their paths crossed. One afternoon, when the boy lingered longer than usual, Elias patted the bench beside him. "Bread's fresher when shared," he said with a wink. Samir hesitated, then sat. Elias placed a handful of crumbs in his small palm, and the bird swooped in gently. The boy's eyes widened with wonder. "They trust you," Samir whispered. "They trust kindness," Elias replied. "When you give something without wanting anything in return, even birds understand it." That was the beginning of something quiet and good. Day after day, Samir joined Elias for a few minutes, sometimes 10, sometimes 30. Their conversations wandered anywhere Samir's thoughts wished to go: school, stars, stories of faraway places, and questions only an old soul could answer. Elias shared wisdom not as lectures, but through gentle tales woven from memory. As winter approached, Marinwood began to shimmer with lights, and shop windows filled with decorations. Children talked excitedly about gifts and holidays, but Samir's heart tightened every time the topic arose. His family barely made ends meet. Even a small gift was a luxury they couldn't afford. He didn't blame his parents, but the quiet ache inside him grew. Elias noticed. One afternoon, Samir sat on the bench, rubbing his cold fingers together. His jacket was thin, older than he was, and patched in several places. "Cold day," Elias murmured. "A little," Samir said, trying to hide the shiver. Elias didn't push the matter. He simply reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a pair of woolen gloves, soft, warm, and clearly handmade. "These are for you." Samir blinked. "But I can't take them." "Why not?" "I don't have anything to give back." Elias chuckled gently, the sound like the rustle of dry leaves. "Not all gifts ask for something in return, Samir." The boy hesitated, his jaw tightening with pride and worry. Elias placed the gloves in his hands. "Consider them a loan the world gave you," he said softly. "The way you repay it is by being warm." Samir looked down at the gloves, then up at Elias. Something in the old man's eyes, kindness without demand, made the fear melt away. He slid the gloves on. They fit perfectly. "Thank you," he whispered. "Good," Elias replied. "Now your hands will stay as warm as your heart." From then on, Samir and Elias grew even closer. Samir began helping Elias with small chores, carrying groceries, sweeping leaves off the path, or bringing him fresh bread from his mother's bakery work. Elias always tried to give him money in return, but Samir refused. "You said not all gifts ask for something back," Samir would remind him. Elias laughed every time. But as winter deepened, Elias's health began to falter. He hid the worst of it, not wanting anyone to worry, especially Samir. Yet the boy noticed the way Elias coughed a little longer at night, how he walked a little slower, how his hands trembled when he poured tea. One evening, after a particularly harsh bout of coughing, Elias leaned back on the bench, looking more tired than Samir had ever seen him. "Are you okay?" Samir asked, fear creeping into his voice. "I'm just an old man," Elias said gently. Nothing new in that. Samir didn't believe him. The next day, Elias didn't come outside. Nor the next. On the third day, Samir could no longer sit quietly with worry biting at him. He knocked on Elias's door. When no one answered, he ran to get his mother. Together, they found Elias resting in his chair, breathing shallowly but awake. "Ah, Samir," Elias murmured with a fragile smile. Samir's mother fussed over him, calling the doctor immediately. Elias protested weakly, but she ignored him, her hands trembling even as she worked. The doctor arrived within the hour and examined Elias carefully. "You need rest," the doctor said firmly. "No cold air, no long walks, and certainly no sitting outside for hours." "But the birds?" "They'll manage," the doctor insisted. "Your health won't." When the doctor left, Elias looked embarrassed. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Samir shook his head. "You're not trouble. You're important." Elias's eyes softened. "You are too, Samir." Over the next weeks, Samir visited daily. He read to Elias, brought him tea, and told him all the little things happening at school. Sometimes Elias was strong enough to talk, other times, he simply listened, eyes crinkling at the corners as Samir filled the quiet house with life again. One cold, snowy afternoon, Samir brought a small wooden box he had been working on quietly for weeks. He had borrowed tools from the school workshop and learned through trial and many errors. The box wasn't perfect, the edges were uneven, and one hinge sat crooked, but it was made with patience and love. "What's this?" Elias asked, surprised. "It's a gift," Samir said shyly. "For you." Elias lifted the lid slowly. Inside was a single feather, one of the sparrow's feathers, brown with streaks of white. "It reminded me of you," Samir whispered. "You helped me feel lighter." Elias's throat tightened as he looked at the imperfect wooden box, knowing the time, effort, and heart behind it. Tears shone behind his glasses. "This," he said, voice trembling, "is the most beautiful thing anyone has given me." Samir's eyes widened. "Really?" "Yes." Elias took the boy's hand. "Because it asked for nothing. That makes it priceless." But as winter slowly gave way to the first hints of spring, Elias's health worsened. One night, Samir woke to the sound of hurried voices outside, neighbors gathering, someone calling for help, the sound of rushed footsteps. Elias had collapsed. By morning, the news spread throughout Marinwood. Elias was at the hospital, his condition serious. Samir felt the world shrink around him as he and his parents rushed there. When they arrived, Elias was awake but weak, hooked to machines that beeped steadily. "Samir," he whispered as the boy approached. Tears filled Samir's eyes. "You told me you were okay. I didn't want you to worry." "That's not fair." Elias smiled faintly. "I know." They talked for a long time, about kindness, about Lila, about birds, and stories and all the little moments they had shared. As the machines hummed softly, Elias reached out with trembling fingers and cupped Samir's cheek. "You gave me something I thought I had lost," he whispered. "Purpose." "Thank you, my boy." "You gave me everything," Samir choked out. "No," Elias corrected gently. "I simply reminded you of what was already in you." When Elias closed his eyes, Samir thought he had fallen asleep. But the stillness in the room said otherwise. The old man who had given expecting nothing had given his last gift, love that lingered. The funeral was quiet, filled with people whose lives Elias had touched without ever boasting about it, neighbors he had helped fix fences for, children whose toys he had repaired, families he had supported silently during hard times. Samir sat in the front row, clutching the wooden box to his chest. Months passed. Marinwood changed, but the bench outside Elias's home remained the same. One spring morning, Samir, now wearing a new jacket and a little taller, sat on that bench with a box of breadcrumbs. When the birds gathered, he smiled softly. "Bread's fresher when shared," he whispered to the sparrows, just as Elias once had. And the world seemed to agree. For kindness, when given freely, never truly disappears. It becomes a gift that asks for nothing, yet gives everything.